Welcome to Money Talks, a series of interviews with me, Liam Halligan, Economics and Business Editor of GB News. In this episode, I speak to Andy Street, Mayor of the West Midlands since 2017, representing the Conservatives. Raised in Birmingham, Street started his career as a John Lewis trainee in 1985, rising through the ranks to become Managing Director in 2007. Under his leadership, the iconic chain saw a 50% rise in sales, a doubling in the number of stores, and the growth of the company's online sales department. In this interview, Street defends the government's levelling up policies, highlighting the importance of the enterprise zones outlined in Jeremy Hunt's March 2023 budget. But Street also urges the Chancellor to think again about the removal of assistance for businesses with sky-high energy bills. Street says some manufacturers and hospitality companies have been locked into contracts with artificially high prices, and he calls on the government to force energy providers to renegotiate such agreements in the light of recent falls in wholesale energy prices. Great to be here in Birmingham, Andy. Thanks for your time. What would you say to those, Andy Street, who say that levelling up, it's nothing but a political slogan?
I would say they are very mistaken. Just 2 weeks ago in the budget, we saw the government do another devolution deal with the West Midlands, £1.5 billion of cash put on the table, new cash for the West Midlands, trusting us to take decisions here to improve lives outcomes in the West Midlands. So that wasn't an easy one decision by the government, but we got there, real commitment.
You are at the heart of British manufacturing here in Birmingham. A lot of Birmingham companies and across your region that we talk to, they're really upset about that rise in corporation tax from 19 to 25%. How does such a hefty increase in the main corporate tax bolster growth?
Well, it doesn't per se. But the government did a number of other things, particularly the full expensing over investment. That was a clear pro-growth decision. And then also we saw in the budget the decision, or in the devolution deal, the decision to give investment zone status and indeed 5 or 6 levelling up zones, as they're called, for the West Midlands. We're standing in what you would probably say is Britain's best and biggest, most successful enterprise zone here in the city centre. That has definitely bolstered growth. We've seen behind you HSBC coming in, Goldman Sachs coming in there. They probably wouldn't have done to this location if it hadn't been for that status. So we've learned from that. We've proposed to government those new measures. They've agreed. That will definitely bolster growth.
A lot of us, Andy Street, are still digesting those budget measures. What actually happened in terms of the establishment of new investment zones? What are they and how will they help business?
So an investment zone and indeed the levelling up zones that we got agreement for allow us to keep here the business rates that are produced by new businesses coming in.
Those taxes that are imposed on business.
But we keep them over 25 years, so a good long-term commitment. And what we do then is we borrow in the short term against that money that's going to come in to set up, invest in the infrastructure around a zone like this, to make it easy to come in, locate here. They've got the right transport links. Potentially we invest in the skills that they need. So it actually helps investment happen.
What would you say to those who say that the Conservatives are presiding over the worst fall in living standards since the 1950s? How does that square with levelling up?
I would say, of course, that if you look at what lies behind the challenge over living standards, and no one's questioning that, there have been global events that have driven that inflation number. We all know it's about the current inflation number, about 10.5%, driven almost exclusively, actually, by what's happened in Ukraine. We weren't talking about this 12 months ago, before the outbreak of war in Ukraine. And so what's happening now is the government is acting as quickly as possible to get inflation back down so that we can begin to see real wages increase again.
You've got many energy-intensive companies here in Birmingham and the West Midlands, Andy Street. They're not going to get assistance, many of them, are they, as a result of Jeremy Hunt's budget?
So let's be clear. Lots of our manufacturers, and we're more dependent on manufacturing than anywhere else in the country, so this matters to us, this question. They got good assistance over the last 6 months, but that does fall away going forward as prices are coming down. But I'd particularly ask the government to reconsider one critical aspect. There are those businesses that negotiated a new deal last autumn because they had to. They're timed out on their existing contract. and they tend to be fixed into higher prices than the market now has. That doesn't seem right to me, and I hope that we'll actually be able to force energy companies to renegotiate those deals, because there's businesses here that potentially will thrive or fail depending on that energy price going forward.
But you want the Treasury, you want Jeremy Hunt to reconsider, to provide more assistance for a lot of the businesses in this part of the world.
That he's given good support already. That particular aspect of businesses being trapped in a negotiation they were forced to make through no fault other than timing, I would like the government to look again at what specifically can be done about that issue.
And how about more direct government support for businesses that are cash-strapped as a result of still sky-high energy bills?
If you allow businesses to renegotiate the energy price, it's now come down very substantially, actually. The spot price at the moment is actually below the level that it was when all these measures were first put in place. So it's releasing people from a particularly artificial contract that they're now locked into. That's what I hear is the real pain for hospitality business, manufacturing businesses in this region.
You are, and always have been, very much a pro-enterprise politician. You've been a pro-enterprise mayor. Are you happy, Andy Street, that the tax burden in this country at the moment is the highest in 70 years?
You can never be happy that it's the highest in 70 years. And do I understand why it's got to that level? Yes, I do. We've seen two incredible events, the COVID pandemic and then the war in Ukraine, driving these decisions. And look how much money was spent on COVID. They were the right decisions. But am I happy with that level? No. And I'm fully expectant that it will come down as the economy can afford it. But we've had a very recent lesson of what happens if you take an unfunded tax cut. And we actually see that's a short-term route that satisfies nobody. So I have confidence that the Chancellor will judge that as soon as we can.
Can the Tories hold on to these red wall seats across the north of England, across the Midlands, that of course will determine the result of the next general election?
The Conservatives, of course, can hang on to these seats, and indeed to the mayoralty here. That may be the other question in your mind. Through one thing, delivery. Demonstrate that we are building more homes, getting more people into jobs. We are actually helping business in the way in which you've just described, getting people better trained for the jobs of the future, building the transport links. If there is delivery in a locality, I do believe voters will accept there's been a difficult time, but stick with the Conservatives at the next general election.
Andy Street, thanks for talking to us on GB News. Thanks a lot for listening to Money Talks with me, Liam Halligan, Economics and Business Editor of GB News. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. GB News, Britain's news channel.